There are people who spend their entire lives trying to do good. They wake up every morning with a clear purpose. They go to work, they help others, and they go home. For most of them, that routine never breaks. But for some, one single day changes everything. This is the story of one of those people, a nurse who dedicated her life to caring for others and who carried the weight of one moment for the rest of her life. She did not start out as someone who wanted fame or recognition. She was not trying to make history. She was a woman who simply wanted to help people. Growing up, she had watched family members deal with illness, and she had seen firsthand what it meant to have someone by your side during the hardest moments. That feeling stayed with her. It shaped the way she saw the world. And when the time came to choose a path, nursing was not just a career for her. It was something she felt she was meant to do. She trained hard. Nursing in those years was not easy work. It required long hours, sharp focus, and the ability to stay calm when things moved fast. She learned how to read patients, how to follow instructions carefully, and how to work within a system that left very little room for error. She passed her training and began working at a facility where the pace was constant and the responsibility was real. She was known among her colleagues as someone who took her job seriously. She was not the loudest person in the room, but she was reliable. People trusted her. Her days followed a steady pattern. She arrived for her shift, checked in with the team, reviewed her patients, and got to work. There was always something to do: medications to administer, notes to update, family members to speak with. She handled all of it without complaint. For her, this was simply what the job required. She was not looking for praise, she just wanted to do things right. Outside of work, she lived a quiet life. She had people she cared about, routines she kept, and the sense of stability that came from knowing who she was and what she stood for. By all accounts, she was a good person, someone who showed up, did her part, and went about her life with honesty and care. There was nothing in her history that suggested she was careless. There was nothing that pointed toward trouble. But that is often how it goes. The moments that end up defining a person are rarely the ones they saw coming. They do not arrive with a warning. They happen in the middle of an ordinary shift, during what looks like a routine moment when everything seems to be moving along just as it should. And then something goes wrong. For this nurse, that moment came without notice. She was doing what she had done many times before. She was following the process she had been trained to follow. She was not distracted. She was not cutting corners. She was simply doing her job, the same job she had done every day for years. And yet, despite all of that, something happened. Something that could not be undone. In the hours and days that followed, the full picture became clearer. The details were examined, the records were reviewed, and the people involved were questioned. What emerged was not a story of negligence or bad intentions. It was something harder to explain. A situation where doing everything by the rules was still not enough to prevent a terrible outcome. And that is what made it so difficult for her to move past it. She had built her life around the idea that if you worked carefully and stayed focused, you could protect the people in your care. That belief had carried her through years of hard work. It had given her purpose. And now, for the first time, she was facing something that challenged everything she thought she knew, not just about nursing, but about herself. The day everything changed. Most days in a hospital or care facility move quickly. There is always another patient to check on, another task waiting, another decision to make. The staff learns to work at that pace. They learn to stay focused while everything around them is moving. For this nurse, that kind of environment had become familiar over the years. She knew how to handle a busy shift. She knew how to stay steady when things got difficult. But nothing about her training or her experience had prepared her for what was about to happen. It started like any other day. She came in for her shift, checked in with the team, and went over her patient list. Nothing on paper suggested the day would be anything out of the ordinary. The patients she was responsible for were the same ones she had been monitoring. The tasks ahead of her were the same ones she carried out regularly. There was no reason to think the day would end any differently than the ones before it. At some point during her shift, she was called to attend to a patient. This was not unusual. It was simply part of the job. She went through the steps she had followed countless times before, checking the details, preparing what was needed, and proceeding with the care that had been outlined. She was not rushing. She was not under any unusual pressure in that moment. She was doing exactly what her training had taught her to do. But somewhere in that process, something did not go as it should have. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no alarm, no sudden realization, no immediate sign that anything was wrong. The situation unfolded the way many medical errors do, quietly, without any clear signal at first that something had gone off course. By the time the problem became visible, it was already too late to reverse it. The patient's condition changed. The team responded. Everything that could be done in that moment was done, but the outcome was not what anyone had hoped for. The patient did not recover in the way that had been expected, and the events of that shift left the mark that would not go away easily. Not for the patient, not for the family, and not for the nurse who had been at the center of it. In the days that followed, the situation was reviewed carefully. The records were examined, the timeline was put together, and the people involved were asked to go over what had happened step by step. What the review found was not a picture of someone who had been reckless or careless. The nurse had followed the correct procedures. She had not ignored any instructions. She had not made a decision that was clearly outside of what was expected of her. And yet, the outcome was still what it was. That is one of the most difficult realities of working in medical care. The rules and procedures exist to reduce the chance of something going wrong, but they cannot eliminate it entirely. There are situations where a person can do everything right and still face a result that is hard to accept. This was one of those situations, and while the formal review may have reached its conclusions, the nurse herself was not ready to close the matter. She cooperated with the process fully. She answered every question. She went over every detail of that shift more times than she could count. But no matter how many times she reviewed it, she kept coming back to the same place. A feeling that she should have caught something sooner, that there was a moment somewhere in that day where things could have gone differently if she had only noticed. Whether or not that was true in any objective sense did not matter as much as the fact that she believed it, and that belief, formed in the immediate aftermath of what had happened, would stay with her long after the formal review was finished, long after the paperwork was closed, and long after everyone else had moved on. When something goes wrong at work, most people are told to learn from it and move forward. That is the practical advice. That is what the process is designed to encourage. Review what happened, make adjustments, and continue doing the job. For many people in many professions, that approach works. But nursing is not like most professions. The stakes are different. The decisions carry real consequences. And when something goes wrong, it is not a report that gets delayed or a project that needs to be redone. It is a person. And that changes everything about how a mistake feels. For this nurse, the days after the incident did not bring the kind of clarity that people hoped time would provide. She went back to work. She showed up for her shifts. She did what was required of her. From the outside, it may have looked like she was managing, but inside, she was carrying something that did not get lighter with time. Every time she walked into that facility, she was reminded of what had happened. Every time she cared for a patient, she found herself second-guessing decisions she had made 100 times before without hesitation. That kind of doubt is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. It is not the same as being afraid of making a mistake. It is deeper than that. It is a constant background noise that follows you from one task to the next, questioning whether you are the right person to be doing this work at all. She had spent years building confidence in her abilities. She had earned the trust of her colleagues and her patients. And now that confidence had been replaced by something she could not shake, a quiet but persistent feeling that she had failed at the one thing she had dedicated her life to. Her relationships began to feel the weight of it as well. The people close to her noticed the change. She was quieter than she used to be. She pulled back from conversations she would normally have joined. When people asked how she was doing, she gave short answers and changed the subject.
She was not trying to shut anyone out. She simply did not know how to explain what she was going through in a way that felt honest without also feeling like too much to put on someone else. Some of her colleagues tried to reach out. A few of them had been through difficult moments of their own and understood, at least in part, what she was dealing with. They told her that these things happen, that the system is not perfect, that she had done everything she was supposed to do. She heard them, she appreciated the words, but hearing something and believing it are two very different things, and no amount of reassurance from the outside could change the conversation she was having with herself on the inside. There were periods where things felt more manageable. She found ways to get through the day, to focus on the patients in front of her, and to remind herself why she had chosen this work in the first place. But those periods never lasted long before something would bring her back to that shift. A similar situation, a passing comment, a moment that looked too much like the one she kept replaying in her mind. She never stopped working. She never walked away from nursing entirely. That, in its own way, said something about who she was. Despite everything she was carrying, she kept showing up. She kept doing the work. Not because it was easy, but because leaving felt like a different kind of failure, one she was not willing to accept. The patients still needed care, and she was still capable of providing it, even if she no longer felt the same certainty about herself that she once had. What she was living with was not just guilt over a single event. It was a complete shift in how she saw herself. The person she had been before that day, steady, trusted, purposeful, felt like someone she could no longer fully claim to be. And figuring out how to live with that gap was something no training had ever prepared her for.
What she left behind. There comes a point in every difficult story where the focus shifts from what happened to what it meant. Not just for the person at the center of it, but for everyone connected to it. The colleagues, the patients, the families, and the broader system that shapes how medical care is delivered every day. For this nurse, that shift did not happen quickly. It took years, and in many ways, it was never fully complete. But what she left behind, in the way she worked, in the things she said, and in the example her story set for others, turned out to matter more than she ever expected. She never sought attention for what she had been through. She was not the kind of person who looked for an audience. If anything, she would have preferred that her story stayed private, known only to the people who had been there and the few she had trusted enough to speak honestly with. But stories like hers have a way of reaching further than the person living them intends. The people who worked alongside her, who watched her carry that weight year after year, took something away from the experience. They saw what long-term guilt looked like up close, and many of them said it changed the way they approached their own work. That is one of the things her story left behind, a kind of quiet lesson that no training manual could have delivered. She showed the people around her what it looks like when someone holds themselves to a standard that does not allow for human error. She showed them the cost of that, not in a way that was meant to teach anyone anything, but simply by living it. And the people who paid attention walked away with a clear understanding of something the profession does not always talk about openly, that the emotional weight of this work is real, and that ignoring it does not make it go away. The nursing profession, for all the care it asks its members to extend to others, has not always been equally careful about the people doing the work. The expectation has often been that a good nurse is one who keeps moving, who processes difficulty quickly and gets back to the task. There is not always space built into the system for someone to sit with what they are feeling, to work through it properly, and to come out the other side with their sense of self still intact. This nurse's experience pointed directly at that gap, not loudly, not through any formal statement, but through the simple reality of what her life looked like after that one shift. In her later years, she spoke occasionally about the importance of support systems within medical teams. She did not frame it as a personal matter. She kept the focus on the broader picture, on the idea that the people responsible for caring for others need structures around them that acknowledge the difficulty of the work. Those who heard her speak on the subject noted that she chose her words carefully. She never used her own story as an example, but the people who knew her understood exactly where those words were coming from. She remained in nursing for the rest of her working life. That fact alone carries meaning.
She did not let what happened drive her out of the profession she had chosen. She stayed, and she continued to care for patients with the same level of attention and commitment that had defined her work from the beginning. Whatever she felt privately, she did not let it reduce the quality of what she gave to the people in her care. That required a kind of strength that is easy to overlook, but difficult to overstate. When she eventually stepped away from the work, those who had known her over the years remembered her not for the moment that had defined so much of her inner life, but for everything that came after it, for showing up, for continuing, for doing the work even when it was hard in ways that went beyond the physical. Her story does not end with resolution. There was no moment where the guilt lifted completely and she felt fully at peace with what had happened. But there was something else, a life spent in service, shaped by struggle, and lived with honesty. And for the people who knew her, that was enough to remember her by.